Welcome to the Gynarchy Podcast. This is your host, Dr. Gynarchy Patel. Here we place women's health and feminism front and center where they belong, engaging in conversations that range from the fundamental to the fearless. With insights from expert guests, we aim to break through the barriers of the patriarchy and envision a new world led by the Gynarchy. So let's get started and dive right in. Welcome to the Gynarchy Podcast. This is your host, Dr. Gynarchy Patel, and today we're talking about the new rules of women's health. That is a book by Meghan Rabbitt. I have it here. My guest, Meghan Rabbitt, is an award-winning journalist and author of The New Rules of Women's Health, Your Guide to Thriving at Every Age. She specializes in writing about women's health and wellness, and her work has appeared in many national publications, including Women's Health, Oprah Daily, Prevention, Maria Shriver's Sunday Paper, and more. She's known for translating complex medical and scientific topics into clear, actionable information, and for telling stories that help readers better understand their bodies, their health, and themselves. Welcome, Meghan.
Thank you so much, Dr. Patel. I'm thrilled to be here.
Please call me Gynarchy.
Okay. I find that so hard with doctors because you've gone through so much training and you've put in so much work that I feel like if I bust out with a Dr. Patel, even though you've told me to call you Gynarchy, I'm sorry.
You're not my patient, first of all. And we're colleagues, and you've put in I think I read 25 years of work in, journalism. So,
Well, thank you. Yeah. 25 years as a health journalist and 3 years at work writing this book, researching, calling or more than 100 experts, fact checking, revising, and then to hold this book is quite an experience.
It's impressive.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk to you because what you did here is very much in line with what I like to do on this podcast, which is share information with women about their health and their bodies. And we really don't have, women really haven't learned this in school, or growing up or from their mothers. So I commend you.
Thank you. And I had that thought at multiple times along my reporting and writing process where I'm like, gosh, we are such amazing creatures. We have these amazing bodies. And those of us who don't go to medical school or into a healthcare profession, we just don't get an adequate education about these amazing bodies that we live in. And so that really became a driving, a North Star, a driving mission of mine is to say, okay, what do we need to know as women? What do we know about sex-specific research that's finally starting to happen so that we can not only take care of ourselves, but have better conversations with our doctors when we have to see and go to see our clinicians who take care of us.
I really love that you mentioned, that our bodies are amazing because, in the patriarchy, we're often, we grow up with so much shame about our bodies. And, like a lot of women, I really didn't know anything about my body and I didn't have my questions answered as a young person. And that really very much did inspire me to go into OBGYN. And my awe for the human body and women's bodies specifically has just grown from getting into this field. So did you have a similar experience?
I did. And I, at multiple times throughout this process of writing this book and reporting this book, I thought, oh my gosh, like, why don't I know this? It's almost there got to be this sense of like a little bit of anger, honestly, where I'm just like, how did I not know this? I've been in this body for 46 years. Like it almost seems like a crime,
Mm-hmm.
And so, I, and even as a health journalist, you would think that I would have had a better understanding about many aspects of health. And while I certainly had a good starting point, I still learned so much in this process, which again, just fired me up so much to be working on this project and helping get it in the hands of women so that we can all get this sense of like, oh, a basic anatomy class for female anatomy, which you'd think we should get in health class, but we don't,
Right.
And the list goes on. Yeah.
So I always like to start by just hearing a little bit more about your background. We got little hints of it, but tell me like how you got to be working as a women's health journalist, like a little bit of your journey.
Yeah, I actually grew up wanting to be a doctor. I
Oh.
really always loved, yeah, I loved health, really. And I thought like, gosh, doctor, like that would fit. And then I got to high school and like the hardcore science classes and was just like, oh boy, like I just don't know that it was my real strength. Whereas writing always was. It was always something I turned to process the world. And so I rethought the doctor path. But then now looking back, it's kind of not surprising that as I got into journalism, I always gravitated towards health topics. So I started my
Mm.
career at Parenting Magazine in New York City, where I was a 20-nothing-year-old talking about pregnancy and childbirth and baby gear and really got such a great education in how to be a service journalist, which is
Mm.
really taking, interviewing doctors about pregnancy and childbirth in that case, and really translating it for women who were pregnant and about to give birth and what did they most need to know. And then my career took off in magazines. And how this book came to be is kind of a fun story. So I wrote a feature story for Prevention Magazine about women's brain health, why we are two-thirds the cases of Alzheimer's disease, what we know
Mm.
about that. And as part of that story, my editors asked me to do a profile on Maria Shriver, who is
Mm.
a fierce women's health advocate, especially in the women's brain health space. And after the story came out, and there was a one-page profile of her and her advocacy work to go along with the feature, she called me. And my
Wow.
heart
Hmm.
sank because I thought, oh goodness, I got something wrong. Fact checking missed something. And she called me to compliment me on the piece and
Mm.
asked me to come work for her. So that's how,
Amazing.
yeah, it was a real honor. And that's how I started working for Maria Shriver's Sunday paper. And about a year in, she asked me to write this book for her imprint at
Mm.
Penguin Random House. She said, I've been in the women's health advocacy space for a while, and we don't have a really comprehensive book that tackles a woman's lifespan from a sex specific lens. What do we know now about women's brains and how they're different than men's? What do we know about
Mhm.
women's hearts, how they're different than men's hearts? And so I set off on this journey to write this book. So that's how this came to be. And a little more about my background.
Thanks for sharing that. Yes, I enjoyed her foreword. She writes a foreword for you in the book, and that was very interesting to hear what inspired her to start her imprint as well. And yeah, that's wonderful. You mentioned that you were passionate about women's health and you wanted and that and the journalism. And I think it's so important right now to have better health communicators. We see so much misinformation out there, and women are just constantly, it's really frustrating for me, as well, watching this. Like they're just being fed a lot of wrong and bad information all over the place on social media. So, like, I'm trying to make a difference here myself. And I love what you're doing here, like, really giving women vetted information. So,
It's evidence-based, science-backed throughout every chapter of this book. The way each chapter starts is a meet the experts box. So you get to see exactly the clinicians, the researchers, the experts who I talk to for each chapter because I'm passionate about that. I'm on social media and I am just, we have an onslaught of not only information, but misinformation,
mhm,
disinformation.
mhm,
And, what I really want women to feel, and especially after reading my book, is that they can become a health journalist in their own life. And I think the area of information and just how much misinformation we're getting is a perfect place to start. When you're a journalist, the number one thing you do is you look at the source. So if you, Dr. Kirti Patel, is putting out information, given your background, I'm paying attention, and I'm looking at the sourcing you give when you provide that information online, let's say. If it's a health influencer with not a good background and maybe they're getting paid by a supplement company to say this supplement changed my life, like that's a major red flag for me. So first and
mhm,
foremost, we have to look at the source of the information. And then, secondly, we want to look at the medical consensus. As journalists, what we do is we corroborate information we hear by checking it out with other experts. And we can all do that. What we can each do is learn a skill called lateral reading, which is open up like 10 different tabs on your internet browser
mhm,
and see and search the information you're looking for. Like does vitamin D cure cancer? I'm making this up, right? But if that's what you want to know, you open 10 different tabs and you start searching that topic to see, what does the Cleveland Clinic say? What does NYU say? What does, this doctor who I really respect say about this topic? And so, yeah, super crucial in this day and age.
I love that part towards the end of your book. You talk about how to vet information that you're getting on social media or elsewhere. And I love you even get down into the nitty-gritty, like talking about like how to evaluate studies,
Yes,
So that's important. That's
it
because
is.
it's overwhelming. Like people will say, this study said this, and so this is what you should do. But how do you really know,
Yeah.
So I
And as
appreciate that.
women, thank you. And we are smart cookies. Like we know our stuff. And with just a little bit of information, we can then feel confident to say, wait a second, I know enough to give this a gut check. And not only a gut check, but a fact check. Right. And
Yes.
I think that's really great. And then, finally, something else I feel really passionate about talking about is when it comes to medical misinformation, health misinformation, we have to speak up about it. We have to be brave and in a kind way. Say if a friend is sharing information that just isn't accurate or that we have found to not be truthful, say something. Don't just let that person spread it all over social media. Like that feels
Mhm.
empowering as well, I think.
Yeah, I commend you. I think that like that how to evaluate a study is something we learn in medical school, and it just never occurred to me to just explain that on social media. I think that's just wonderful that you put that in the book. Like people can learn, anybody can learn that. So, and I like this framework you give people how to evaluate who you're getting the information from and medical consensus. So, and I get the impression from looking at all these chapters and how many experts you cite. I mean, this must have been a daunting project. It doesn't surprise me that it took 3 years. Honestly, it's more of a guide or a manual. It's just something to have in your library and reference over your lifetime. Like it's not, I don't know. I didn't find it a book that you could read cover to cover because it's very dense, unless you do it in very tiny bite-sized pieces every day. But
Totally.
I guess I wanted to ask you, like, how did you approach this, and how many experts did you end up talking to?
Yeah, it is a big book. And a friend of mine recently said, and I really love this, it's a reference, right? It's something you want to have on
Yes.
your bookshelf so you
Yes.
can tuck in and out of based on what feels up for you on the health front. But also, she said, it's so beautiful. It's really a coffee table book because how great would
Hmm.
it be if the men in our lives, our husbands, our sons, our fathers, our best guy friends see it and are like, oh, well, what are the new rules of women's health? And we bring them into the conversation as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a daunting task to say, Maria Shriver asked me to write a quote unquote manifesto. And that, she wanted me to cover a woman's lifespan. And there's a lot of aspects of our health. And so what I really tried to do was take it in bite-sized chunks. It's like when I
Mhm.
hike a lot, I live in Colorado. And sometimes when the hill gets steep, I'm just thinking right, left. And so that's
Mm.
that's what I
Oh,
did
it's
with
true.
this book. I think with any hard thing that we face in life, we have to
Yes.
just chunk it out, right? And just focus
Mhm.
on the steps in front of us rather than the destination. And so, yeah, so I spoke to a lot of experts. I leaned on them to find out, am I covering everything I need to cover here? And then, yeah, over the course of a couple years, I spoke to more than 150 experts. There's
Wow.
132 quoted throughout this book.
Wow.
So it was a lot
Amazing.
of tears, a lot of weekends spent working, a lot of angst and wanting to make sure I got it right. I hired professional fact checkers to help me make sure I got it right. And so yeah, it was a project, but it's one I'm really proud of and that my biggest hope is that it helps women.
It's great. You've made a great legacy here too. So, and of course, science is not stagnant. So will keep adding to that. I'm sure you can have a future follow-up,
Yeah, that
follow-up book.
that would be great, right? Science is not
Yes.
stagnant. It's ever changing. And in an ideal world, we'll have more and more sex specific research. We'll have more
Yes.
answers for women because boy, research has been underfunded and we have been under researched as women for far too long. That is starting to change. We need to go further. But in an ideal world, in 5 years, I'll need to write a whole new book because we'll know so much more.
You should treat it like the reference that your friend called it a reference. It kind of is, and you should maybe treat it like that and come up with additions instead. Maybe that's a good
Total.
idea.
That's a great idea. And that's the thing is like when I sat down to write this book, I felt passionate too about you're not going to see like in magazines it's always like a new study says this or the latest research shows this. What I tried to do here because as we talked about in the beginning, as women we're just lacking a great education, a
Hmm.
baseline knowledge about our bodies. That's what's in here. And
Hmm.
so it's
Hmm.
it's yes, it's filled with the latest of what we know, but it's not like new research that's just going to feel old in a year. I do think it will hold up to the test of time.
Yes, I love the way you planned it out, starting with the basics, the fundamentals that women need to know, then going into certain problems, then talking about how to optimize your health. It's just a great thing for all women to learn. So,
Yeah.
explain the title, like explain what you mean by the new rules of women's health. Obviously, that means you're in opposition to the old rules. So, how do those need to change? What are they and how do they need to change? And what do
Yeah.
you propose?
I think for so long as women, we have been letting other people make the rules for us. And so this title is a nod to it's time for us to take the reins and make new rules that work for us. And so that really is the overarching idea behind the title, which is that we finally know more now about women's health. For too long, as I said before, we were under researched. And now finally, as the research is starting to come through, it's like, okay, what do we need to know now? What are how is the new way of being in the world and getting the care we deserve because of this new knowledge we have? And so, yeah, some of the old rules are not paying attention to women as different beings, right? We were
Mhm.
for far too long compared to the male norm, quote unquote. But we are half the population. We deserve research into us in our own right, right?
Yes.
And I think another big new rule is like we have to be active participants in our care. Doctors now talk a lot about shared decision making, but for us to make shared decisions with the people who we entrust our bodies, with, we need to come to the table prepared. And I think the new rules of women's health, is how we do it. We come with knowledge so that we can have amazing conversations with doctors like yourself.
Yeah, I think it's a tool to help patients advocate for themselves because there is a big knowledge gap. I'm often talking about that on this podcast. Like, sometimes we doctors assume that patients know about certain things, and we don't have the time in the office visit often to do some of the fundamentals. So I think it's just an excellent extra tool to help get your, questions answered and also know what kind of questions to ask, right?
Totally. Yeah. And
Um,
on that note, I after I finished reporting this book, I moved and I needed a new
mm,
primary care physician. And I sat down with this doctor and had my annual physical, and her eyes like lit up. Like when we were talking, she was just like bright and sparkly. And I kind of was like, gosh, you seem so engaged. And she said, you're so engaged. You're coming with so much knowledge that
mm.
this interaction has been so much fun because we've covered so much ground. And that's my hope and that's what I think the power of knowledge is I want every woman to have that experience because it felt fantastic.
Yeah, it probably could bring you together, on the same page, closer to this, thinking the way your doctor thinks,
Yeah.
about things.
Yeah.
So, and I loved what you mentioned earlier about, how yeah, research has been focused on men, and we often regard in this society men's bodies as the norm. And I find that really funny and interesting because when you learn embryology, maybe you discovered this while writing your book. I mean, the norm is actually women's bodies. Like the embryo starts as female, and then a certain gene has to activate for you to go down the path of being a man or developing into a male body.
It's fascinating, right? And
Yeah,
what really blew me away in the anatomy chapter as well is how similar our organs are until
mhm.
like, is it 8 weeks of development or 10 weeks of
We're
development?
homologs in the
Homologs.
very early stages. Yes, we're just,
Yeah.
I mean, we have same body parts, and then they diverge at various weeks of development.
Development.
And yeah, it's really fascinating, right? Like the homologue to the penis is the clitoris, you know?
Totally. And what I think is so amazing about that is like men, we know a lot about the male penis, right? But we don't know a lot about the clitoris. We're just learning
Right.
lately more about the clitoris. And even women, my book is dedicated to my nieces, and I have two young nieces and one older niece who just graduated from college. And when I showed my older niece the picture, the anatomy of the clitoris, it blew her mind. Like she was just like, what? And she's a science major. She wasn't even learning this. And so
Wow.
yeah, and it's like, wow, is right. To your point, like we have these are the repercussions of us thinking of the
Mhm.
male as norm in research for far too long.
You mentioned that research and medicine are, well, it's biased, right? How do you feel like that's changing now? Do you feel like it's changing?
I do. I'm super hopeful. I feel like it's changing. I feel like we have a long way to go. So let's, start with the bad news. We're not where we should be, but
Mhm.
I do see more and more sex specific research coming out. I think our understanding of the female body has grown exponentially in recent years. And I think partly we are collectively starting to demand this research because we are talking about the fact that we should not be compared to men. Women are not small
Mhm.
men. And I also think, too, there are more women at the table making the research decisions. In years past, call it a conference table full of male researchers and doctors
Mhm.
who never dealt with crippling pelvic pain. And so they wouldn't
Mhm.
know to study that. And now women are like, we have to be studying all of these various aspects of women's health that have been ignored.
Yes, yes. And I mean, I see that just in the last few years with just how many more women doctors are out there online or other health professionals, not necessarily doctors, but, experts basically talking about women's bodies and menopause especially is very much having a moment. So that's really encouraging. It seems
It
like
is.
women's voices are being raised.
Absolutely. And we're talking to each other more about it too, which I think is a great thing. I think that's the downstream effect of that. It's like, I know at 46, I can't go anywhere now with a group of women and not be talking about menopause and menopause hormone therapy and symptoms, which I think is a great thing. We're really starting to
Yes.
tackle and the taboos and formerly taboo topics are no longer taboo, which is great.
Yeah. I think your book could be a conversation starter too, for sure.
Yeah, I think so.
What were some surprising things that you learned while researching this book?
There were so many. I feel like a couple of the biggies, which I wanted to talk to you specifically about. The first one
Okay.
actually has to do with pregnancy. And something that surprised me, and the more women I mentioned this to, the more I realized, oh, a lot of women don't know that if they had pregnancy complications, even if those clear up after giving birth, it puts women at a higher risk of heart disease later on. And so, actually, our gynecologic history should be part of our conversation we have with a cardiologist later in life, which
Absolutely.
I found so interesting. And we're not talking about this enough, about
Mhm.
pregnancy as the heart's first stress test. And,
Mhm.
again, it's not to say that if you had pregnancy complications like gestational diabetes or preeclampsia or other complications, that it's not like you should beat yourself up. That's great. You gave birth and then you didn't have to deal with those things. And they're part
Mhm.
of your personal health history that you should proactively
Absolutely.
bring up with other doctors. Do you find that
Yes.
patients don't really understand that?
Yeah, I don't think that's talked about, but you're absolutely right, but if you think about it, it not only is a stressor, but you have significant hormonal and metabolic changes in pregnancy that can affect you the rest of your life or change things thereafter. So a lot of times some women are developing autoimmune diseases after pregnancy or they have diabetes and sometimes it doesn't clear up. Sometimes, it brings out mental health issues later. I don't know, quite a lot of things. It's, not just a strain on your heart. It's just, your entire body changes somewhat, in pregnancy in various ways. And then your return to a baseline is a new baseline. It is not what you were pre-pregnancy, So
Right.
yeah, I think it's very important after pregnancy, based on what happened during your pregnancy, even if you had a perfectly healthy pregnancy, to reevaluate things,
Yeah.
with your primary care doctor, and then see if you need any further, you know, specialty care, right? With a
Totally.
cardiologist, like you said.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. And like our gynecologic history, oftentimes we think of as that's just for the gynecologist. But I
mm,
think that was a big surprise to me. It's like even something like hot flashes in the menopause transition,
mhm,
that
mhm.
also has a potential impact on our heart, right? And that is
Yes,
something we should be
yes.
bringing to our PCP and other specialists we might see later. And so I think that was a big surprise and something that's really changed the trajectory of my how I think
Mhm.
about my own care is like
Yes,
my
yes.
gynecologic health history is part of every conversation I should be having with all of my doctors, not just my
Hmm.
gynecologist.
Yes.
Yeah, another big surprise for me that again has impacted me personally is I interviewed Dr. Lisa Larkin, who is a women's specialist who is a breast cancer survivor herself. And she's really
Mm,
passionate about spreading the word that most women think that when it comes to breast cancer prevention, if they're getting their annual mammogram, they're on it. They're
mm,
covered. But mammograms are a screening tool. They're not a prevention tactic, right?
mhm.
And most of us aren't having a conversation with our doctors about our lifetime risk of breast cancer. And, Olivia Munn made news about this. Her doctor recommended she take, and they did together, I believe it was the Tyrer-Cuzick risk
Mhm.
assessment. And it prompted Olivia Munn to get an MRI. And sure enough, even after a mammogram that came back clean, she had breast cancer in both
Oh,
breasts. And
mhm.
so I feel really passionate now. That surprised me. When I interviewed Dr. Larkin and was like, gosh, I've never had a conversation. I was 45, 44 years old when I interviewed Dr. Larkin. And I was like, at 44, a doctor should have said, hey, let's go through this risk assessment together. And you know what Dr. Larkin said? You can take the test online yourself and bring the results to your doctor. And so that's what I did. And I had a really great conversation with my gynecologist about
Great.
my risk score and about my screening plan.
Great. Yes. I mean, I think this is actually an example of science not being stagnant and changing, because I've noticed in the last few years we are, yes, we had these models to predict your lifetime risk of breast cancer, but I notice a lot more doctors, gynecologists like myself, primary cares, radiologists are referencing them a lot more. We're now ordering, I've definitely ordered more breast MRIs or automated breast ultrasounds, way more in the last couple of years than ever before. So I feel like that's partly, yeah, we either patients didn't know, but we've also, not all providers or doctors had this knowledge, and now we're sharing more and growing in the specialty and giving, better care. So, and I think that's wonderful that you provide that info in the book, because yeah, maybe your provider hasn't caught up, and it's a great way to ask them, like, I heard about this Tyrer Cuzick model. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right,
You
but
are the Tyrer-Cuzick model. Exactly. And I heard about it and can we do it together? And
Mhm.
what I have found and based on all the interviews I did with doctors want us to be proactive like that. My
Yeah.
gynecologist was like, "Oh yeah, cool." Like I brought my laptop to you can do it on your phone as well, but I had my laptop. I showed him the result and then he said, "Oh, okay, cool. Well, actually your last mammogram report showed this as your lifetime risk. So yeah, I think let's get you a baseline breast MRI." And it was just, again, it's a way that I left that appointment that day feeling really empowered. Like, wow, look at
Yeah.
me taking the reins.
That's great. Yeah. I mean, obviously I'm biased, but I tend to think of doctors as a group as kind of learners and who want to keep up. And sometimes they are overwhelmed, especially a primary care. Like as a gynecologist, I'm kind of more on top of these particular kind of issues, but a primary care has to take care of problems, the entire scope of that arise in the entire scope of medicine, right? So you can see how maybe they haven't kept up with some of this newer recommendations, and you might be helping your primary care get there, which it isn't a patient's job, but I think we're always learning and growing, and we are at different places on our timelines, so.
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially if you love them for other reasons, or they're great otherwise, and this particular thing they're weak at, you can help bring them forward. So
Yeah. And I think, another big learning from my book, I interviewed a doctor about how to make the most of a short appointment, because I think all patients these days are feeling like, gosh, I only get like 15, 20 minutes and there's a lot I have
yeah,
to cover, And this primary care physician told me, we wish we could spend more time with you. Know that as the baseline. But
yes,
then she gave me all these tips as to what she loves to see her patients do so that they can optimize their time together. And one of the first things is like, come with your list of symptoms, things that you want to go over. So maybe it's your Tyrer-Cuzick results. Maybe it's the fact that you're not sleeping well, whatever the list is. And then she said, organize the list in order of priority and then show me the list. But at least by prioritizing, you can say to your doctor, hey, these are like the top 5 out of this list of 20 concerns I'd love to tackle. Does that track
yes.
with you as what's most important from your perspective as
Mhm.
well? And then she might say, you know what, this is so great. We're going to need 2 appointments. So schedule another visit so we can go over the rest of it. Here's what we can cover
Yeah.
today. And it's just like, again, a way that we can take the reins and say, look, we know we'd like more time with our doctors. And the reality is we probably won't get it, but there's things we can do.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. And that is something I do with patients as well. Like sometimes they'll give me a lot of things, problems that they're having. And I have to be honest and say, unfortunately, this is the time we're allotted, and what should we address today? And I'm going to have to bring you back. And I think this points out, I'm going to take this moment to point out, this points out one of the flaws of our medical system, okay, which is that it's time-based appointments and not like, more holistic, care based, like you're not giving people the amount of time they need to address all the issues. And we have to, we bill on visits and time. And I really don't like that, it should be more problem based, or addressing certain issues and however long that takes, because everything can be discussed and solved in a 15-20 minute appointment,
Totally.
Yeah.
And and my heart goes out to physicians who are working in this system with major systemic problems. My goal
Mhm.
as a journalist is to say, okay, let's find the tips and tricks that those of us who are working within that system need so that we can maximize our time, but it's such a bummer because like my primary care physician who I loved, who was amazing, the one whose eyes sparkled when I came to her, after 2 years, she told me I have, what did she say, like 2,200 patients. She said, I can't survive. And she left to go to concierge medicine. And
Oh,
so now I have no primary care physician until they
oh,
hire someone
I'm
else.
sorry. I'm
But
sorry.
it's
Yeah.
what are, we have major systemic problems and doctors are
Yes.
up against it right now, and I think that's the other thing, we talk a lot in the media about medical gaslighting and I think sure that happens and that's a real shame. And based on all of my interviews, wow, like there are so many doctors out there who really do want to take care of us,
Yes.
who want the best
Yes.
for us, who want to see us thriving and healthy, and they're up against a really hard system. And so I think if we can acknowledge that, it's part of that shared decision making, shared
Mhm.
human experience, right? It's like,
Absolutely. Yeah, I have had a lot of colleagues, I see a lot of that, like leaving traditional the medical system and going to concierge practices. And it's so easy to I mean, that's basically cash pay, right? So you can spend that hour if you want to, seeing a new patient and then having them in for follow-ups with ample time and really be able to get into the counseling more. And I think that it's sad because that is a system obviously that is going to serve a certain demographic of patients that can afford that, right?
got it.
But the majority are going to are going to be seen in our traditional medical system, and we have to solve these problems because, yeah, I mean, most people are going to get left behind. But I don't judge my colleagues for doing that. I think it's like a must be a delight to be able to spend so much time with a person and really get to know them and really address their issues, at every visit in a significant way.
Totally.
So you mentioned in the book towards the end that, you give some tips about how women can optimize their health. I know you can't go into all of it, but do you have some other tips?
Yes.
Maybe some handy tips?
I do. I
Share.
have three I would love to share right now. I think the first one is, and we've touched on this, is to really know your family and personal health history and document it. This is something we all kind of maybe roll our eyes at when we're going through those forms, when we're sitting in the waiting room, like but it's really important. And so if you're young listening to this, like talk to all of your family members about what diseases run along your mother's line, your father's line. These are really important components that put together the puzzle piece our doctors are going to try to put together for us and our health and our future health. And so I think that is really key. I'm a big fan of I have reporters notebooks. You can take a journal, you can take even in your notes app on your phone, just write down all the symptoms you're dealing with, right?
Mhm.
Keep a document, know your menstrual cycle, like things like this actually really do matter when it comes to our health, and getting taken care of. I think another big one for how we can optimize our health, and this is for all of the midlife ladies and really anybody in their 30s, I'd say 40s and 50s, is like we have a prime window of opportunity right now. And I think once our reproductive years are winding down, we lose touch points with our doctor. Maybe we're dealing with young children
Right.
or aging parents, and the annual gynecology visit doesn't feel as important. But
Mhm.
man, it's so important. And not only that, but what multiple doctors who I interviewed for my book said is that when you're in your 40s and your 50s, the changes you make now are going to lead to a payoff when you're 60 and 70 and 80. Like the strength training routine you do now is going to help you later on. All the different lifestyle habits that we hear about, if we double down on them now in midlife, we won't be seeing the orthopedic surgeon or
Yes.
exactly. So I think those are big. And the other one I think it deserves repeating is really making the most of your doctor's visits. So that could mean optimizing your time when it comes to having a short visit. And I think it also means like really interviewing your doctor. If you have the possibility of choice, you can come to your doctor with questions you want answered to get a sense of, is this clinician the right clinician for me? I had a hysterectomy earlier this year. And when I was trying
Mm.
to find a surgeon, I saw three different doctors until I landed on one where I felt like, you know what? This is the surgeon I want to do this procedure on me. And I want to empower women to feel that way, like now I understand it comes with a hefty dose of privilege if you are able to see multiple doctors, which isn't always possible. But if it's an option for you, get that second, maybe even third opinion when it comes to certainly specialists and ideally even your primary care physicians, like your gynecologist and your primary care doc. You want to, I want to look forward to going to see my doctors.
Yes. That's a great bits of advice. I'll say something about, you mentioned, getting your family history. I often, patients have shared with me, and I guess I see this in my family as well. Like sometimes there's just like this, like, you know, I think this book could also help people talk to their family because honestly, or thumbing through it with a mother or your aunt or somebody, because I notice like a lot of patients will tell me older generations, like they are often, there's shame about their bodies, there's shame about their medical issues, specifically, and particularly women's health issues, like there's shame about talking about things like infertility or if you had to have breast surgery or a hysterectomy. Sometimes women don't know the family history because their family members are ashamed to talk about it.
Oh my gosh, totally. And I think that's another big hope and again mission with this book is that we can collectively start talking about these topics, these women's health topics, in a way where we're able to drop the shame. because that was
Yes.
another trend I heard from so many clinicians and researchers, mostly the clinicians I interviewed, which is that, wow, it is so sad to me how much shame women have about their bodies. I
Mhm.
interviewed a breast oncologist, Dr. Elizabeth Coleman, who said, I'm sitting at the bedside of patients who are dying and they are apologizing to me for not wearing deodorant.
I know. I'm always getting sorry, I didn't shave. I wish I would stop. Like, I don't
Totally.
care. I don't care. You shouldn't
Oh,
have to shave
exact.
ever, ever.
Amen, right? And like
Yes.
your amazing urologist, Dr. Maria Uloko, when she does exams with women, vulvar exams, she gives them a hand mirror and she
Mm,
wants them to see what she's doing. And
okay.
they are like, ew, oh my God, no,
I
I can't
know.
see my vulva. And she's like, this has to change, And so I
Yes,
think you're bringing up
yes,
such a great point. And as we talk to our moms, our aunts, our grandmas about health, like, don't be surprised if there's some shame or if there's some
yes,
sugarcoating of topics where you're like, I want the details. We talk about this now, and they don't want to go there. Just try to get as much information as you can.
yes. You gave me an idea. I might have to give this book to my daughter and my mom, spread it around. So it's a great
Totally.
gift.
Oh my gosh, totally. I've
Um,
had such cool conversations with my mom based on this book and my sister. It's like, and
yeah.
they've had conversations with their doctors as a result of what I've talked to them about. So I love that.
The other thing you mentioned about taking notes, I just started my own health binder. I know there's medical records in the, system, but I feel like from visit to visit, it is nice to have a notebook, a journal, a health journal or a binder like I created and ask for the copies of your notes, ask for your ultrasounds, ask for your labs, collect it yourself because we have a very fragmented healthcare system where when you go to see a specialist, it's like extra steps to get your records for them to see things. You can and patients have done this, and that's what inspired me to make my own journal, my own binder was some very organized patients have brought in their information. I'm like, thank you, because I'm like trying to find their PAP, and they're like, oh, here, I have it right here, or they'll pull it up on their phones, and I'm like, thank you.
I love that you created that. I want to buy one for myself and all of the people in my world because here's the thing. My mom is that patient. My mom is that very organized patient. And she
Love
is
it.
now 73 years old. Her binder is thick and she comes to all of her appointments. And some doctor will say, like, well, when was your last, mammo or something like that? And she's like,
She'll know.
she goes into that section
Exactly.
and her doctors talk about doctors' eyes lighting up and sparkling. They're just like,
Yes.
oh, this is awesome. Yeah.
Exactly. That's a delight. I mean, yeah, you're not on the other end to see what these electronic medical record systems are like, but it is like sometimes like finding a needle in the haystack. Okay. And sometimes I'll tell them, let me make your follow-up visit and that'll give me some time to go hunting for these old records. So it's terrible. So it's such a delight when you bring it in.
Yeah, and I think actually there's another section of my book that's all about medical bills and medical debt and how to navigate
Mm.
that. And I think if you have that binder, you can quickly and easily refer, if you get a bill, you can say, "Wait a second, did I actually have that procedure?" That's one of the tips. Like a lot of times, there are things you get billed for that might not have actually happened. And if you're that organized, it's just that process is going to be so much easier for you.
Megan, thank you so much for writing this amazing reference or manual or guide to women's health. I found I'm really proud to have it in my own library and I will reference it myself. I think I'm going to use it to help find future guests because you have all your experts listed in there. It's fabulous. So I wanted to know if you have any closing thoughts.
I feel like we've covered so much and this has been such a fun conversation. And I think what I really aim to do, we toss around the term knowledge is power, which I think is very true, right? But what I found after writing the new rules of women's health is that knowledge also gives you a sense of empowerment. And you just feel
Yes.
more confident in how to take care of yourself, how to take care of your family, and how to talk to the people you go to help you care for yourself, your doctors, your other healthcare providers. And I think that's my real hope, is that this book you can tuck into and out of when something is going on with your health, when you want to feel more prepared for a certain specialist visit, when you just have some questions and you want evidence-based answers. That was really my hope with writing The New Rules of Women's Health.
I think you did a great job. So, what are your future plans? Like, do you have a book tour? What are your next projects? Kind of curious about that. I'd love to meet you in person. If you're up, but tell me when you're up in the Boston area. I'm also frequently in New York, so I want to know.
Yeah, it's funny. I used to live in Boston, actually, and I hope to do an event in Boston. Maybe we can talk about doing one together, actually.
That'd be fun.
Right? Yeah, because I love being in conversation with doctors for the book events that I'm doing. I have a couple events coming up in New York in January, and I'll be out in LA as well for another couple events. And then other than that, you can find me at newrulesofwomenshealth.com, learn a little bit more about me. There'll be, you can follow me on Instagram at Meghan Rabbitt. And yeah, I think in terms of next, I really just want to double down on reporting about health. We've got new dietary guidelines. We've got new studies and research coming out all the time. And it's a lot for people to navigate. And I can't wait to get back into, just those topics that women really care about and want to know about, and helping translate the science so that we can all make actionable steps in our lives.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I had a ball talking to you. This was great.
Here's my closing thought for today. In the patriarchy, discussing reproductive health topics like basic anatomy, menstruation, sexual pleasure, infertility, postpartum changes, and menopause is stigmatized, and women are often left in the dark and left to piece together information from their peers, the internet, or through trial and error. But in the Gynarchy, we believe that girls and women should have access to reliable health information about their bodies throughout their lives in order to be able to optimize their health and live their very best lives. So down with the patriarchy and up with the Gynarchy. Thank you so much for listening. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please consider leaving us a review on one of the podcast platforms. Take care. Did you enjoy this episode of the Gynarchy Podcast? Know someone else who might enjoy this conversation? Make sure to subscribe and share the show with your friends and family. Find us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and just about anywhere you find podcasts. On social media, we can be found on Blue Sky, Instagram, and TikTok at The Gynarchy. Thank you so much for listening.